Hi, very good morning to you. There's nothing wrong with your screen. It's blank, and that's because, the words are more important than the pictures I want to show you. I want to share a little story with you, and then, if you want, you can go back to your own little bubble. Some of you might get something out of this, and I guess, like we can already see, the majority of you won't. And that is because your mindset is just not where it should be right now. You're occupied way too much in spending most of your time thinking about putting food on your table, keeping a roof over your loved ones' heads. And, there's nothing new here. This sort of mentality has got to a point now, as it did do, hundreds, even thousands of years ago. What is happening in today's society, and it doesn't matter which country you're in, this already happened before, and the outcome is predictable. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So, you might be thinking now, or occasionally thinking about, the government that you sometimes participate in voting for. Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, Labour Party, or it could be, if you're in the United States, one of the other parties, Republicans, or, whatever. Doesn't make any difference one iota, because you should already be aware that there is already an unelected government running your country. And the one world, the New World Order, or the global government, has already been established, but not announced. This is the way they go about their business. We see this when they go to war with another country. They never declare they're at war. They just go to war. And like I say, this is nothing new. But the big problem and I'll tell you who this organisation is. It's the United Nations. But they've made a big mistake, a critical mistake, which is going to drive people away from cities in the not too distant future. And I know this. It's ever so predictable, because this is exactly what has happened to previous civilizations. We're talking the Mayans, the Egyptians. Okay, let's talk about the Mayans. The Mayans went through a period of time where they could not maintain suitable quantities of water to feed the residents in the cities. They went to some extreme measures by building underground cisterns. They were very good at making sure that the water that filled up in these cisterns or underground chambers were lined with waterproof cement. But it didn't make any difference, because the Mayans left their cities, and they were great cities at the time. And the reason why the residents left the cities is because the governments that were running the cities failed to provide the basic necessities. Same thing for the Egyptian Empire. It pretty much collapsed when the climate changed and the River Nile didn't flood annually as it used to, and give that land where it flooded the nutrients for them to put the crops in the ground to feed the numbers of people there. Eventually, when there is, a massive reduction in the necessities in order to maintain numbers in small communities and cities, when that fails, people leave the cities and go back to the way of life. Now, let's bring it back to our times here in the UK. Some of you may remember the reason why we went to the cities in the first place. 40 years ago, it was common that most people lived in little villages, all around the countryside. And then there was the emergence of cities like London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and Scotland, Edinburgh, and places like that. And what attracted people to the cities was the abundance of things like electric was plumbed into your house. You know, whereas, you know, before, if you lived in the villages, you know, you were still probably reliant on, you know, candles and things like that for light. You know, the electricity wasn't there like all the amenities was at a disposal in the cities, and that's why a lot of people left the countryside and moved to the city, because they had gas, they had electricity, and their workplace was within an adjacent travelling distance, which made it, you know, comfortable for people. Getting back to the, you know, the way things are right now, is the cities, and not just in the UK or America or Canada or Australia, the cities are beginning to fail people for the same reasons they failed the previous civilizations in our history. And I'm talking about the fact that the United Nations got together and decided that it would be profitable for them, and that they could get away with it, to drive up the energy costs across the world. And that they had the perfect excuse to do so by blaming CO2 for the cause of global warming, totally omitting, you know, Mother Nature's influence on the climate. You know, all of a sudden human beings have become more powerful to, you know, some people in ruling power than nature itself, which is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. You see, the problem is with the city is it's fixed. You can't just pick up a city overnight and move it to another location when the amenities become scarce. But this has been deliberately done in the name of profiteering. But what is happening on a very small scale, we're talking about less than 1% of the world's population have woke up to what's going on, and they are beginning the next exodus of all the cities that are failing. The other day, I was on YouTube. I don't know how I ended up coming onto this, but I was watching a mile-long queue in America for food handouts. This is a sign of a massive failure. And, you know, we're talking thousands of people in that line that stretched over a mile long, that couldn't afford food for a multitude of reasons. Maybe they are working, both members of the family, the wife and the husband, to support the family. And, you know, after they pay the bills, there is no money left for food. That's a failure of the system. And people are waking up to this. And there are a lot of people that will be at the end, the last ones to leave, and they will be the worstest ones off. You know, I said, you know, if you live in a vulnerable area where earthquakes are happening all the time, you know, then you should probably consider leaving, because if you're hanging on to those material assets, then, you know, you need to think about the fact that maybe in 6 months' time, through hanging on to those material assets in a high risk area, you've probably lost your loved ones. And, you know, the realisation will be that you have lost everything. You may still have, you know, debris left to scurry through for your belongings, but you might have already lost some of those people that, you know, were the most dearest to you. I realise that there's a psychological problem with people today, and you can't tell them, you know, anything that can help them. They have to try and, you know, they have to come to the realisation that they have to help themselves. You can point out all the things that could possibly lead to disasters for them, but they have to make the overall final decision. And like I say, there is probably 1% of the Earth's population that have already begun to leave these cities, these toxic cities that are unsupportive. If you live in somewhere like New York, you know, take a look around and ask yourself the question that if food doesn't arrive in the shops for 2 months, how are you going to survive? Because you are dependent on those imports into the city to keep you nourished, to keep your family fed, for the water to come into the city, for the sewerage to leave the city, all these things. But when you start to see people being priced out the market with energy, those things that brought them into the city in the first place, when they can no longer afford those things, and there isn't, the abundance of work so that they can participate in a monetary system, that the writing is already on the wall, and it is just a matter of time. And people are very resilient. They hang on to the dear death to their things before, cutting loose those things that are dragging them down. This is the problem. Psychologically, they don't realise that these things are not worth as much the effort that is being put in there to maintain them. And it's very difficult in this day and age, I understand that. You can't just up and leave if you've got nothing even. I understand completely. Because, we live in a time where everybody owns every square inch of this world. So where do you go? The system's got to get to a point where it absolutely breaks, and we're probably not too far away from that. With the climatic changes that are taking place, that in itself was enough to change people's minds in our ancient cultures and civilizations that it was time to go. But we're faced with times where the climate's changing. The frequency of these disasters are more relevant, they are frequently happening more than they ever have done. And then at the same time, you only have to realise that if you want to participate in the monetary system, you need to exchange your labour in order to get that money to start with. And if we're living in a time where technology is taking the jobs away at an alarming rate, then at some point, there isn't going to be a job for you to exchange your labour for, so that you can keep the very things on your table as you've been accustomed to over the last 10 years, 20 years. What I'm trying to say is the best times are behind us, and now we've got to face the music. The world economy, because of energy prices went up around the world, is going to collapse. That is their final mistake that they have made in order to put money in the pocket short term, which they will do. That's perfectly fine. But what they don't realise is they have caused, people to start thinking more clearly now about abandoning these cities which are unsustainable at the present time. And not for all of us at the moment, some of us still have a job, but do you really think you've got a job for life right now? If you've got a job, with the instability of the economic system, do you really believe you've got a job for life? And you can maintain that 10 years left that you've got on a mortgage? Because all the odds are against that. One thing I realised in the years that I've been in this world, growing up, is that I realised that having been mostly self-employed in my younger years, that I got to a point that these were just small businesses that I owned. I got to a point where I could spot big problems coming for the business, and I'd just ditch it at that point, either sell it on or shut it down, because I realised that once you get to a point where there's going to be no work for a few months, and at the time I was in groundworks, so when it comes to winter time and the ground starts to get waterlogged, it's almost impossible to do groundworks in those conditions. I knew this was coming, so I sold the business before it took me down. And at the time we had a small factory, we employed 6 people. I had to shut the company down before it took me out financially. And the money I sold the company for just barely covered what assets we'd got with equipment and things. But I managed to get out. If I'd have stayed, persistently paying, the rent on the small factory unit we had and paying the wages, I would have been wiped out for the next 20 years. So, you get an idea for when things are collapsing, and, you can put that up against, real world experiences like what we're seeing now. You know that there's no opportunity to be had unless you're one of these corrupt people and, you're high up in the food chain. Maybe one of these people that work for the United Nations with a bullshit job. Maybe you're okay because you can keep on fleecing the 99% of the world's population to the very last minute. We don't know how fast this exodus is going to take on a trend. It's going to be a trend. What's going to happen is people are going to soon realise that the people that left the city are enjoying a way better life. They no longer have to go to the shopping mall to buy their weekly groceries and have to subsidise, when there's no tomatoes on the shelf, there's no cucumbers on the shelf, there's no lettuce on the shelf, And even if there is, because of the energy involved in creating these vegetables and salads and meats, you'll not be able to afford them. Whereas the people that live on a small holding out in the countryside, seem to have all of it under hand. They've got their chickens, they've got their eggs, they've got their chicken meat, they've probably got a couple of hogs, pigs, and, they're getting by. I've got a friend who lives in northeast Thailand, and their family have got it perfectly worked out. They grow more rice than they need. I'm talking tons of the stuff. And they sell what they haven't used at the end of the year. And, by then, the next crop of rice has come in. But on top of that, they grow bananas, mangoes, an abundance of fruit. And then, they don't live too far from a main river. And they've got fish, And everyone seems happy. The pressure is reduced, massively. It's got to be the way forward. We've been conned into this belief that, living in a city is where it all should be, where we all should be. And it's a load of lies. And I've got to say this, they will go to no ends to achieve what they want to do, these corrupt people in this time that we're living in. They have got no scruples about doubling the energy costs. And I'll tell you why that was the biggest mistake they made. Because energy is needed in almost every aspect of modern life. And it affects farms with the fertiliser. If you can't put the fertilisers and the pesticides down on that ground, you're not going to achieve the yields of crops or the quality of crops that you would normally do. So, farmers are going to start to struggle, from now on. And if you live close to a farm and you see them struggling, if you can lend a little bit of your time out to them, and do it. Because, you'll be helping not just the farmer and his family, but you'll be helping, all those people that are dependent on his products. For way too long a time, we have neglected the people that work the hardest. These farmers get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to milk their cows, and they get the lowest amount of money for their product. Whilst, the supermarkets and the shopping malls get the maximum. They earn more profit than the guy that actually produces it. Can you believe it? And that is even considered fair. Every aspect of our daily lives is a crack in the vessel. And like I say, the best days have already gone and left behind us. And all is left is the reality for some of us to come to the conclusion that that is the only way forward. If you've got thousands of pounds tied up in a property, you have got options that other people haven't got. Whilst there is still land for sale, there's an opportunity. Because every aspect of our city lives is gearing up against us. It's the start of the end. When they drove up the energy costs to the levels they did, they really did whop the final nail in the coffin. Because from that point on, everything went up. Just look around. Look at what unions are left now are striking for better pay around you right now. Here in the UK, the teachers are striking, the medical staff, doctors and nurses are striking, we've got the railway workers striking, we've got government employees. Can you imagine, they've even shot themselves in the foot by not paying the government employees a salary that can maintain a reasonable quality of life. They've even shot themselves in the foot by penalising their own people. That's the state of things right now, which is going to get worse, because when the energy went up, everybody needed to meet the costs of rising inflation. I'm by no means an economist, but you don't need to be in any case to work out what is wrong right now with the way of life. And as well as I know, nothing's going to change to better it. It's going to get much worse. And we're just talking about the problems that human beings have created each other. Here's how stupid we are. You imagine being one person in a room of 1,000 people, and the 1,000 people that you're in this room with are all have a different opinion to the way things should be, and you're being looked at right now as the odd one out. And you're saying to them, I'm sorry, but you're all wrong. Every one of you that make up that 1,000, you're all completely wrong. That's exactly what's happening right now. Because I'm going to put it down very plain and simple. One of the biggest problems we're all going to face is the freedom to migrate where we need to. You see, human beings don't consider themselves as a species of animal. They consider themselves as something else. They've put themselves way up high on the pedestal, and through their policies and their way of going about their business, they have shot themselves clearly in the foot. And I'll just point this out now. I'll make a point which I think that you'll be able to align your thoughts with. Tell me, when we was talking about that analogy of the 1,000 people all pointing at us saying you're the odd one out, and we're trying to say, oh, hold on a minute, all 1,000 of you are completely wrong. How does that look? Well, let me put it in this context. There are billions of species of animals, insects, plants on this planet, and not one of them has to take a mortgage out for a place to live. Birds are free to put their nests in whatever tree they want. Most wildlife is free to build its house where it needs. Use, the inheritance of just being here, which is an entitlement to the resources around it. Now, we're talking billions now. The number's in the billions, because there are that many different species that are doing something different to us. And what we're doing is completely insane when you put it in that context. Because all the other species, which are, as we would class, not intelligent species, have got this simple thing worked out. You want to live in a tree? You build your nest. You have your offspring. You want to live in a hole in the ground like a fox? You want to build your den? You do it. Every other species has worked out something so simple in life, yet we have made something so difficult for ourselves. We've barred ourselves from the resources of this planet No good going crying to God that you haven't got nothing, because when God left this planet for us to inherit, every resource that we could possibly want is on this planet. Do you understand that? It's ourselves that have barred ourselves from everything through pretending to be the most intelligent species. But how intelligent is it that, if you want to build a house in the open countryside, you don't want to live in the city, you want to be, create your own homestead and be self-sufficient. You can't even do that anymore. So that's the level of intelligence of human beings. And when you compare it to all the other species on the planet, they are much smarter than us, because they don't have these rules and regulations. What governs their numbers is the food chain. If the food isn't there in abundance, say like for a pack of lions, then the herd of lions reduces in size. Same for buffaloes that are wild, or caribou. What reduces their herd size is the abundance of what's around them to sustain those levels of numbers. What I'm saying is that they allow nature to do its job. We don't. We've put 8 billion people on this planet, and we've adopted systems which now no longer work for those people. We're not controlling the levels of birth rates on this planet. We're just expanding them. Now, how intelligent is that when you think that we are living in a technological advanced time, and most of the robotics and electronics take away the jobs? You've seen it as well as I have, what's gone on. First of all, local governments allowed these super-sized stores to open up, which stripped away the money from the little towns and the individual shops, which employed lots of people when you think about it. And then what they did with these superstores is they came out with a self-service till, one that you can scan your own food off. And that meant that they didn't have to pay a cashier to scan your goods for you. Now, when you go in shops around the UK, the majority of the tills are self-service. And through people using them self-service tills, you have put people out of work that would normally be the cashier and scan your goods for you. And now they are doing away with all those cashiers, and it will all be self-service. But there's something else emerging, which is becoming popular in the UK, and that is home delivery. These companies now have just got warehouses, they haven't even got shops, and they've just got pickers working in the warehouses, and you order your stuff online. So now, the people that used to stack the shelves and work as a cashier no longer have a job. And it's that sort of technology that is pushing everybody out of a job. I was going down the M40 here in the UK, it's a motorway, and there's a sign there, there's a politician, and it said 51% of the UK residents are on benefits. You think about that, because I bet you that those statistics are mirrored in a lot of other countries right now. So that means 49% of the people that are actually paying taxes are supporting 51%. This scale has tipped. It's just a matter of time before, for that reason alone, there's a massive collapse. Not just here in the UK, it'll be all over. When you start seeing mile-long queues, there's something definitely gone wrong. When there's no intervention by the government, which are supposed to be there to protect the people, and there is no intervention in feeding that mile-long queue with food so that they can maintain life, there's something absolutely wrong. As well as everything else, guys. We know that there are big problems facing Americans right now, and there are big changes to come, because what has been going on has been unacceptable with other countries. So they've decided to ditch now the United States dollar as the global currency. And that's going to have devastating effects for Americans in the not too distant future. You know, I really, my heart goes out, because that status of being the world's global currency changes everything for people in America. And not just in America. So, you know, the reality is that the United Nations are the single global government. You know, they're unelected, just like the European Union. No one elected them. They are self-proclaimed leaders of things. Then they have taken charge. They've managed to, together in the United Nations, drive the agenda that CO2 is damaging our atmosphere, leading to global warming. And even though scientists like me show perfect examples of where their lies are, and that what they're talking about is nothing but nonsense, they have the political persuasion to convince 99% of the people right now that what they are doing is right. And I guarantee you that this is what they've done, because if you look around you when you're in traffic at the level of electric vehicles that are around, because they drive people to the mindset that they needed an electric vehicle so that they could, you know, help clean their environment up and help save the world, when it's just a fairy tale. You driving a Tesla isn't going to change anything. In fact, when you work out the energy that goes into building that Tesla, and to, you know, resource the materials for the battery, the cobalt, the lithium and all that, and then when you look at the environmental impact that mining these materials has on the environment, you will realise that by driving that car, you are actually causing more harm to the environment, and you haven't even plugged it in at this point to charge it up. Because if you look at the way we produce energy, you'll find that all the renewables are not adequately there to sustain the levels of energy required at this present time. So what they did is they used the excuse of doubling up on the cost of electricity would justify, you know, a reduction in demand. So people can no longer afford to have electricity, so naturally the consumption of electricity goes down as a result. And of course it looks like the renewables are doing much better, because they're still producing the same quantity as renewables as there was before the energy went up in the first place. I know it gets a little bit complex to think about it, but it's obviously no rocket science what they did. You know, you put the prices up, people can't afford to use it, so the actual amount of gas that you would normally use to generate the electricity through gas-powered generation of electricity goes down. You know what they've done is absolutely mean, cruel, wicked and nasty. Not only have they waxed their pockets rich at the expense and death of a lot of people around the world, because when people can't afford to heat their homes, you know, can you imagine how you would feel right now being a 70, 80-year-old, worked all your life, and now you are being priced out of the gas and energy market, and you are being faced with, you know, either heating your home or putting some food on your table. You know, you've got to sit there in thermal clothes, multiple layers. You know, you've worked all your life, you've done more than your fair share, and you're being fleeced right now. You're being expected to sit in your home. You can't afford to go out. You can't afford to put the gas and the electric on. You've got to sit there and, you know, be content with that sort of life. That's your reward for all your hard work. They don't give a damn about what you are experiencing right now. Just like they don't give a damn about the mile-long queue of people waiting to be fed. That's why these cities are stagnant, dirty, unproductive places now for human beings to live, and they are totally unsustainable, and it is just a matter of time before, you know, the straw breaks the camel's back. because less than 1% have already woke up to what's going on, and they've already made the decisions. I'll just say this, guys. You need to work together. If you want to keep things, then you need to work together in order to do that. And I would definitely, think about some of the things we've discussed here. And, if you're in doubt whether anything I've said is not true, then please do your own little bit of research. You're going to come back to this very moment where we are right now, and you're going to say, you know what, Gene, you're right. We have got a major psychological problem with a majority of people on this planet right now. They have been brainwashed to thinking that anything material they own is worth losing family members over in order to keep. That's a terrible way to think. What is more important to you is sustainability for you to get those things that are necessary for you to enjoy life. And unfortunately, that comes down to just a few things if you think about it. You need water, you need food, and you need shelter. And that really is it. Anything else is a luxury. And the majority of people's problems today are just luxuries. Don't be fooled by these people. Start using your own grey matter. Start using your brains and work these things out. Because there is a train coming, and there is a hell of a lot of people on that track, and they don't even realise that the train is soon going to be right in front of them, and they haven't moved out the way of that yet. There is much worse to come. Mark my words on this. What we're trying to do here at the observatory is not just monitor one of the rarest events that's ever occurred in humanity, human history. Not just cover, the anomalies that are affecting people's lives on a regular basis. Just go over to Pole Shift News. You'll find that we've covered most of the anomalies, even some of the things that people aren't, that don't consider is, relevant, like the Schumann frequency. The frequency, the very frequency that you have lived your entire life whilst being on this planet, and that has been the frequency in the background for that period of time. We even cover that on, poleshiftnews.com. And if you want to support us, there's a link down there. And if you want to be one of our patrons, there's also a link down there. So what I usually do, you have the best time you can do with your family and loved ones today. It's not guaranteed it's always going to be the case. There's a lot of hardships coming all our way, and God be with you. Your God be with you. As always, bye for now.